He was a small-town boy with big-time dreams who would go on to be the youngest GP winner in history. Soon following, he would fight for the title in Moto 2, but then he would hook up with an eccentric billionaire, and a series of ill-timed decisions and poorly timed rides would lead him into a downward spiral. Will he be in GP anymore? And will the next big thing become the next big waste? This is BrotoGP's Beneath the Rubber, an inconvenient ride, the Scott Redding story. And welcome to BrotoGP, guys. We're here. As always, I'm Kevin, narrator and NPR Kevin, and with me is Dennis. You may be expecting the Le Mans episode, but unfortunately, Robert, our engineer and one of our main stars, is desperately ill. So instead of that, you'll be hearing the debut episode of the newest series, Beneath the Rubber. Before we get to that, though, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Writer's Law. That's Writer's Law with a Z.com. If you have any injuries, any accidents, they're your California accident injury lawyers specializing in motorcycle cases. That being said, I'm NPR Kevin. Dennis is above me. Say hello, Dennis.
Audience Dennis.
Audience Dennis is here. He's looking nice. He has his Casey Stoner print in the back. His hair is freshly cut, and we are ready to go. Before we go to our episode, we just want to the weather report says it's 50 and balmy with a chance of rain. God. And our newest breaking news is that Johan Mir has been announced as signing a contract with Suzuki XR and should be making his debut in the 2019 season. More information as that breaks. As of now, back to the debut episode of Beneath the Rubber, a Scott Redding story. He was a young boy from Gloucestershire, England, with massive dreams, nearly as large as the height that he had, but he would not let his stature get in the way of his dreams. So Scott Redding, Scott Redding himself, with the weight of an entire nation on his shoulder, would start a career that would begin with so much promise and yet end with so much pain. There was chants of Redding and hoisted flags, Union Jacks everywhere, and now a career dying with faint screams of Dino.
I was gonna say, I love the part where you introduced him as having hooked up with an eccentric billionaire, and it all just went tragic from there. He reminds me of Robin, you know, hooking up with an eccentric billionaire like Bruce Wayne.
Before we get to hooking up with the eccentric billionaire and becoming hooked and addicted to VDS, sometimes referred to as RCV, that would bring him down a downward spiral, we have to start at the beginning in a small, sleepy town of Gloucestershire, England, where a small boy riding 80s metric hit bikes would win 6 races straight. And that would be only a precursor of the potential and the talent that he had. Scott Redding in 2006 would go on to test for the Red Bull Rookies Cup, immediately given a contract. And while his results would not live up to his initial ideas of potential, he would score podiums at Jerez and would give some idea into what he would do as it goes on. Very quickly, this rising star flashed. He considered his meteoric-like rise, and he would join the Blue Sins Aprilia team and become the youngest GP rider to win a race in history. He would surpass the great Marco Melandri, and many people were sure that this young boy, this tall, gangly, yet showed so much promise, would be the newest British hope. He would be the next Barry Sheen, and he would take on the mantle of the English Anglo, to fight off the Spanish hordes. Isn't that right, Dennis?
More or less. I'm completely enthralled by this. So, like I said, audience Dennis.
Audience Dennis would know that he would go on to win Rookie of the Year for being the highest placed new rider, finishing his season in 11th. And although 11th doesn't sound like the best position you would think, there was flashes of brilliance. There was that first win. There was getting that 4th place in Qatar in his opening round and literally starting the race on the podium. The world was at his fingertips. There was nothing he couldn't do. It didn't matter what was happening. Scott Redding was the newest thing. He was the next best next big thing. He was the great white hope for MotoGP for British riders.
Wow.
Unfortunately, like many riders, he was thrust into the limelight too early. He was not trained, he was not mature enough and ready to go, and he would hook up with an eccentric billionaire to start the Moto2 team, Mark VDS. Unfortunately, the Mark VDS team was wrought with controversy, as you can even see now in contemporary times, 2018. This was only the beginning. The team would underperform. Scott Redding would not get exactly the results he was looking for, although eventually he would overcome these results and overcome the demons that plagued this team to become the youngest winning rider in the intermediate class as well. Isn't that right, Dennis?
I don't know where he won. Like I'm looking at his record. I don't see it. I'm fact checking you, man.
You don't need to fact check me, Dennis, because you're just looking at Wikipedia in the exact same page I'm looking at too. In fact, I effectively texted you the link to that Wikipedia page. Right. To fully understand the depths of which Scott Redding would fall, we first must look back to one of the greatest heights that he would have in the 2013 season of Moto2. That season, Scott Redding would be viewed as a potential title favorite, but he would start off the season lower than expected. His results in preseason testing didn't go, but he would go on to win 3 races, multiple podiums, scoring 3-4 poles, to what looked like a massive podium challenge, but not unlike the issue where he crashed in 2010 in the tragic accident with the late Showa Tamazawa. Scott Redding would crash and injure himself with another Japanese rider, at the Japanese Grand Prix, colliding with teammate Steve Rabat, better known as Tito, better known as Willem Dafoe. Right. Exactly. And this would go on. This would go on. You can't hear Rob, but he's actually talking in the back of my ear right now. This would be the first of many issues in which where rule changes, tire changes, and legitimately being in the wrong place at the wrong time would go on to plague his career, hence an inconvenient ride. Dunlop would change the tires, and he would not show the results he was looking for, struggling to win, struggling to maintain podiums, but yet still doing so, despite his overwhelming stature compared to the other riders and the minimum weight required.
Just out of curiosity, how tall is this guy? Do you have that fact?
197 centimeters. I don't fucking know. Look it up yourself. Despite coming in second place and not achieving his goal of winning the intermediate class title, I keep calling him Mark because of Mark VDS, which he'd become synonymous with over the course of his career, unfortunately. But Scott Redding would be brought up to the premier class in 2014. Unfortunately, he would be teamed on the Go and Fun Gresini team with the lower spec Honda production bike, a bike that would catch out even such greats as Nicky Hayden and many others. He was originally billed as maybe being only 1 second slower via Casey Stoner. It turns out that bit of fake news would be the example of what Scott Redding was in for. Despite amazing photos of elbow dragging and finishing every race but one en route to an amazing rookie season, Scott Redding would be on the consistently underperforming production level RCV, which is right. There was a picture on our Instagram when we posted that we'd be doing this episode, so feel free to go to our Instagram at BrotoGP and find that image. Right. It's very distracting that they can't hear you, Rob, because you're laughing. It's cute that my jokes are landing, but there's no laugh on the track.
Except for mine.
Right. That being said, with the results may have underperformed due to the RCV production bike being significantly lower spec than the rest. But his relationship, which would go on to crown and be the problem that plagued his career, the inability to let go and get back together with poor exes. First, it would be going back together with the Mark VDS team, and then it would be being honeypotted back to the Gresini team with Aprilia. But to go to that, we first have to discuss that after the season in which he would finish every race, despite being on the lower spec bike that required being overridden, he would move on to a factory spec RCV with the new Mark VDS team moving up to the premier class. Unfortunately, and yet another series of inconvenient rides. He would start his career on Bridgestones only to be caught out in the middle, switching to Michelin's and switching to yet another team. Would be yet another move that he would find him switching team after team after team, never settling, never finding it, always lost. Effectively the Odysseus of the MotoGP team. Always searching, always looking for the promised land, caught out, the siren song singing him, dragging him to different rides that would never work out.
I don't mean to interject, but actually his best finish in MotoGP, ironically enough, is on that production Honda.
That is incorrect. He actually finished third on a Pramac bike despite crashing out in that race.
No, I meant like for the whole season. In championship points.
Yes, correct. Where he would finish every race but one.
That's just ironic to me.
I think the problem that you find is that what happens is that potential is a crown that wears heavy on the head. It enables you to view what you think you should have and perhaps not focus on the spot that you're in right now. Scott Redding constantly viewed as the hope of his country, as the next big thing, always switching bikes, but never finding the spot, never finding his groove, always thinking he could do better than that. I can't believe I haven't coughed yet.
and there you go. There you go. Right on cue.
I don't even know what's happening on the screen right now.
I think it speaks for itself.
All right, to bust out a narrator, Kevin, for a minute and just go into regular Kev talking to Dennis. I think Scott Redding was kind of the rider that a lot of people really liked. He was an interesting personality. He seemed real and far more relatable than, a lot of guys have given a lot of people crap. Marquez is manufactured, or Alex Marquez is nepotistic, or Danny's a robot. Even Nicky Hayden, outside of the American fans, was maybe times viewed as maybe a little too corporate. He never said anything bad. He was always almost overly proper, and that was his personality. But Scott Redding seemed very relatable, very real to a lot of people. He was down to earth. He was kind of like a middle-class kid who just, was really talented. He wasn't like this manufactured Spanish midget. So a lot of people were rooted for him early on. He, along with Marquez, was kind of the guy who was the harbinger of this elbow down, nearly nearly helmet dragging style. And a lot of people were rooting for him, but whereas we've talked about Maverick Vinales, well, up until now, but he'd always been at the right place at the right time. Scott Redding always found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it seemed like every time he moved, you thought, okay, this is where it's going to happen. This is where it's finally going to work. Like, okay, he was on Moto 2 and, Marquez leaves, and now he's clearly going to fight for the title. Then they change the tire. He's got a lot of problems. And he's too big, right? He's like 6'1", 6'2". Well, let's move him up to MotoGP because he's going to be big. Oh, when the production Honda story came out, it was this big story, right? They were going to get rid of CRTs. All the CRT shit was going to be gone, and he was going to be on the production Honda with Gresini. This production Honda was great. It was barely slower. It was cheaper. Teams could run it. And then what you saw was everyone was honeypotted by that. Honda didn't care. They didn't put any real information or any real, work into it. Exactly, support. And so Scott Redding, right? And then what happens? Mark VDS moves up. And what do we think? Here's a championship winning team. They won with Tito, that kind of stuff. Scott Redding's back with them. They've got a billionaire heading the team, so money's not a problem. They've got a factory Honda. That's what we need. Marquez had just won the title with the factory Honda in his rookie year. And then what do we come to find out in years down the line is that Mark VDS is a total fucking mess. And Rob, I'm echoing in your screen quite a bit. And then what we would find out is that the Mark VDS team was a complete mess. At this point, they're nearly imploding in front of everyone's eyes, and so he'd have that problem. Then what do we see that happens to him again? He moves to Pramac, and we all think, sweet, Ducati has just brought the Pramac team closer into the series, closer to the team. They're the true junior team, and he actually gets a podium on the bike, right? And he gets that podium with Bradley Smith. Mm-hmm. It's the first 1-2 British podium since 1970 something. Who knows what it is? You could probably look it up right now and see it. But so his whole career is here's the time. Here's where it's actually going to happen. Here's where, and he has even said this in an interview. He said, you know, there was a time when I was the next big thing, and then I wasn't. And then I really wasn't. And then we find that he's on an Aprilia. And I think Scott Redding, you know, we've joked that, you know, the story of this episode is like an inconvenient ride. You know, I talked to Dennis that he has been inconveniently in the wrong place at the wrong time every fucking step of his MotoGP career. So we have this guy who the fans like. His Instagram stories are hilarious. He connects. He seems like a real guy. A lot of the English-speaking world likes him, and yet he cannot get a competitive ride. He's always changing crew chiefs. He's always changing bikes, and every time he changes, he seems to move to a worse team. I mean, the Gresini Honda was a good team, but he had a bad bike. He moves to the Mark VDS best team, and then when he moves back to the Gresini team, which was a good team who at one point was winning races, they're now the de facto Aprilia factory squad, which is, you know, not a good bike.
No. So do you really think it boils down to just bad timing for him or bad management?
I mean, it's hard for me to view bad management because if you were in a vacuum, every single person thought this was a good move, right? He got into MotoGP because, look, this kid is fucking huge, right? He's like 6'1", 6'2". He's pretty muscular for his size. He's just too big. He's fighting Pol Espargaro. He wins a bunch of races. It's time to move up, right? He gets second in the championship because of an injury. He theoretically could have won it. Let's move up. Gresini's a good team. They're running, you know, they have a quality staff. But he gets the RC, and everyone was caught flat-footed by that production Honda. And then he switches to Mark VDS. We think, oh, he gets a factory Honda, a full-spec bike, and Mark VDS is winning championships, fighting for championships. They're partnering with Estrella Galicia, so we know that they're taking things serious by connecting their the Moto3, Moto2, and MotoGP teams. So we think, wow, here's a team that's taking it serious with massive money behind it. And it turns out that their engineers can't do shit. They're really unable to dial this bike in and collect it. And we've seen this with many other riders. We've seen what Jack Miller can do the moment he gets on the Ducati. He's already significantly faster than he was than Mark VDS, despite being on theoretically a lower spec bike, you know, years old. We've seen even Tito, who's on another another satellite Ducati, looks faster. He was a championship winning rider. Look at Franco Morbidelli. Look at Tom Luthi. You see all of these top prospect riders fail every time. But look what happens when other top prospect riders go up. Maverick Vinales, who, you know, goes up to Suzuki, gets a win, moves right to the factory Yamaha, gets 3 more wins. You see other riders do especially well when they don't go to that Mark VDS team, but that is not what anyone was thinking in 2014, 2015, that Mark VDS team would be such a problem.
Right.
So the question really becomes, you know, where does Scott Redding go from here?
Well, let me ask you, where would you rather see him? Back to Moto2 or World Superbikes?
Oh, without a doubt, World Superbike. Look, going back to Moto2 is a death sentence for fucking everyone. Look at Sam Lowe's right now. I mean, get rid of Tony Elias. He went back the opening year. That opening years never count, right? Like Sandro Cortese never did much in Moto2, beyond that, but he won Moto3's opening year. The opening year comes down to whichever team happens to have the good setup and good bike. But you go back down, Hector Barbera, all those, it's not a good look. You're going to get chewed up by the young, hungry guys. If I would like to see him stay, but there really is nowhere for him. If he moves to World Superbike, the question is where? Because in World Superbike, there's really only, you know, a handful of quality rides, and that becomes the next thing. Does he move with a lot of promise to somewhere that he should be able to be competitive, and yet because of team, because of politics, gets a poor bike that he can't perform?
Okay, so but where would he likely end up at this point?
Likely, I'm not sure. I mean, I could easily see him being out a ride at this point. You know, right now, if you look at MotoGP, even in MotoGP, there's more quality riders than there are rides right now. I mean, we're talking about, I mean, NPR Kevin broke the news that Joan Mir has apparently signed a pre-contract or a contract with Suzuki. Jorge Lorenzo might not have a ride next year, and he's a 5-time champion. right? Like, where's Andre Iannone going to go? There's simply not enough quality rides for the amount of talent that's out there. And that's GP, the series with the most money, the most sponsors, the most investment, and the most investment by the series itself, GP paying the travel costs of the satellite teams and all that. I mean, you look at World Superbike, Dennis, and you think, has anyone other... Nicky Hayden won on the Honda at Sepang a couple years ago, but other than that, if you're not on a Kawasaki or a Ducati, you're not doing shit. The drop-off there is even bigger than the drop-off from the top satellite teams to the top factory teams in MotoGP. I mean, you look at right now in MotoGP, this is the most competitive time for satellite rides. Look at Johan Zarco, multiple podiums. You look at Petrucci and you think, wow, he might get a win. Everyone thinks Zarco's going to win this year. No one looks at the factory Yamaha, the factory Honda, or the MV Agusta in World Superbike and thinks they're going to win a race. Like, that's funny to even say, right? So I have no idea where he's going to go, because the question is, at what point do you lose motivation for just riding? Like, you can't keep putting it out there and keep racing and driving hardest on bikes that literally can't win. Not only can't win, can't even podium, can't be competitive. Right. I mean, at some point, Scott Redding is becoming more famous for his Instagram stories, for the videos, his adventures with Chiara Fontessa. And part of me thinks that that's a drag, because those are examples of a guy that people can connect with, right? Like, you look at Marc Marquez's, pages, his social media pages, and you think, wow, I have no idea. I can't connect with this guy. Like, maybe I root for him because I started watching MotoGP 3 years ago, but you don't think like him. Scott Redding has done something where he's gone from this little kid to this grown man covered in tattoos, yet we've followed the whole story, and he has brought us in closer every step of the way. He's easily, in my opinion, one of the most entertaining riders on the grid, right up there with Iannone, right? Like, we joked about with Rob not being able to be here, what were we going to do? And it was like, my two thought processes are, let's do an episode on what do we do if there's no Scott Redding, and let's do an episode on what do we do if we have no Andre Iannone. Like, fuck, right? Like, it's becoming so watered down and so cookie cutter, and we have these guys that aren't that, famously so, and yet we're on the verge of losing potentially both of them.
It's a shame, because it seems like he managed to stay relevant off track, but just can't get it together on track,
Right, like he's simply unable to get a competitive ride at the right time. I mean, this guy, for whatever reason, is the king of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm not sure, as you asked earlier, if that even means poor management, because every ride you hear him take, you think, okay, that makes sense. But you're talking about a guy that, if you read his recent interviews, he had that pretty eye-opening interview, I don't know what that was, a month or so ago, where he was basically saying, like, look, I was the next big thing until I wasn't. And then he has this recent interview after Le Mans where he's saying, like, look, I don't know how to ride this thing. I can't ride this. Nothing I do works. We've turned the bike upside down, and he's unable to do anything on this Aprilia, despite being effectively a factory bike that they should be giving him direct factory support. So what we're seeing is a guy who is opening up enough that makes me worry that he's at the end of his rope. Not like literally, I just mean like the end of his career, where he knows there's nothing left to lose, so fuck it.
I find it so ironic that he's finally a factory rider, and it looks like he's having the worst start of the season in his entire GP career.
Yeah, and you wonder at what point, and Everett's brought this up on previous podcasts, like, how do these guys maintain inspiration, to maintain that hardcore focus and dedication and the fire, really, once, like, you're on the backside? Like, I don't, we've talked about Kenny Roberts Jr. on the 4-stroke Suzuki, right? Like, remember when him and John Hopkins had the same bike, and Kenny Roberts was like, look, I'm not going to kill myself for a 7th place bike. I'm just going to get 10th, because I'm not going to kill myself and take all this risk and injury just to get 7th, right? Especially from a guy who was a champion at one point. So Scott Redding, you know, he had an upslope. He had the production Honda, then he had the factory bike, then he moved laterally to the Ducati. But there was thought, like, if you do really well, Ducati is known for moving riders up or giving them factory machinery more so than other bikes, right? You see Andrea Iannone getting moved up. You see Petrucci getting factory spec equipment in the current year. And it was almost like, and then remember they even had that famous thing where they said, okay, Petrucci and Scott Redding, we're going to put you guys in like your own mini championship. Remember that? And then, of course, they decided to do that whole mini championship thing after he podiumed. Right. So it's like that podium didn't even count, right? How convenient or how inconvenient. And so he moves laterally to his Ducati, and we at least think that that's not a bad move. And then he, of course, but then he enters the downslope. He goes to Aprilia. The bike is not good. It seems to be almost comically worse. Like Aprilia keeps getting worse. Like if Rob was on this episode right now and we talked about tech stuff, I've seen some stuff where Yamaha only got like 20 seconds faster, but the Ducati got a minute faster and the Honda got like 37 seconds faster. The Aprilia is not increasing at even close to the rate the Yamaha is, and the Yamaha is desperately left behind. And at what point are you unable to muster the gusto or the fortitude to go out there and risk it when you're on a bike that's a 12th place bike? Yeah, and the question is, you know, he's still young enough. Maybe there's potential, and right now I think you see, and we're talking about a year, Dennis, where Jorge Lorenzo might not have a ride, right? Like the grid, right? So they're talking about there's kind of a cleaning house thing taking place, and the question is whether not World Superbike, but if you look at who's on the grid right now, who is really on the chopping block, and who can steal one of those rides. The main problem is, or maybe not the problem, but the main issue is that Scott Redding is aiming and gunning for the same seats that Andrea Iannone is and that Danilo Petrucci is, right? Like there are three guys who are factory, semi-factory, all kind of gunning for the same spot. Any team would kind of like that. Andrea Iannone sort of famously comes with baggage, but I don't know. Have you seen Redding's fucking stories and shit? We're talking about a dude that gets cornrows and gold grills. You know what I mean?
But I think you hit it on. I think you hit it the nail on the head here as far as where Redding is right now. You know, he's at a crossroad because he's been at this long enough to be a realist as far as results are not getting them, but he's still young enough to be stubborn to try to even keep trying to just keep banging his head on the wall.
Right, exactly. So on that note, we will give you this short video episode you could watch. But when you come to the next episode of BrotoGP's Beneath the Rubber, Banging My Head, title of Rob's sex tape.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Walked right into that one.
And thanks for listening to our impromptu episode of Beneath the Rubber. Apologies that Rob is sick. Unfortunately, he has an issue where he's coughing and has a little bit of a chest cold and is unable to record. So if you're looking for the Le Mans episode, it'll be coming shortly. That being said, if you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe for more awesome BrotoGP content. Let us know in the comments below what next episode of Beneath the Rubber you'd like to hear. Thanks for listening.
Au revoir.